Welcome to another episode of Why We Love Graps. I am Caden Hanafi, and for this episode, I am joined by Ella J. Ella, thank you so much for joining me. Why don't you start by giving a little introduction about you and what you do?
So yes, I am a full-time, I just say it wrestling media personality because it feels like a broad spectrum of things. I do writing, I do interviewing, I do live coverage, basically everything. I've even done commentary for wrestling. The only thing I haven't really done is performed in an actual ring.
Mhm.
So I wear a lot of hats, but mainly right now it is writing and interviewing and occasional on-site coverage for with travel.
So, with working in wrestling media, you mentioned the writing and interviewing. What would be your normal day to day?
So every day changes because I am a freelancer and I set my own schedule. But I do write 6 days a week. So most days I'm writing, and when I'm not writing, I'm basically filling in interviews when I'm free. So as of right now, again, I'm a freelancer, so I work for 3 different wrestling sites: SC Scoops, WrestleZone, and Wrestling Inc., where I write. On some days I write for 2 different sites. Some days are just one site. It depends on the day. So every day is different. But yeah, like I said, I'm writing 6 days a week. But when I'm not writing, whenever I'm free, I'll set in for interviews, and editing too is another part of that as well. Editing interviews, doing research, obviously doing research too while you're writing news or opinion pieces. So there's a lot that goes in. No day is that exactly the same.
Mhm. So let's talk a little bit about what we're here for. The show is called Why We Love Graps. For people who are watching this and not really aware of what graps are, I had to explain that to somebody a few weeks ago. Graps is short for grappling, and grappling is a maneuver in professional wrestling, and it comes from amateur wrestling, and that was brought into professional wrestling, which is we're going to talk about it a little bit. Professional wrestling, yes, everyone's going to say, is it fake? I don't like the word fake. I like the term scripted. I think
Yeah.
Ella would agree with that. Scripted is a little bit more accurate. But let's talk a little bit about that. Why we love graps. You, focusing more on you. What is the first memory you have of professional wrestling?
So if we want to be technical, this was before I started watching it. Technically, the first time I was introduced to professional wrestling was on, I believe, season 4 of Project Runway. It was down to the final 6, where 6 of the divas at the time, like Michelle McCool, Layla, Crystal, were in there. Candice Michelle. The contestants were making ring attire for the divas, but I didn't really know much about wrestling at that point, but I remember that episode because I was a fan of Project Runway. But my formal introduction was the following year. So that was 2008. The next year, the summer of 2009, I was in middle school at that point, 6th going into 7th grade, I believe it was, just scrolling through channels on a Friday night. Turned out to be Friday Night SmackDown, a main event steel cage match. I quit. It was actually a loser leaves town match between Jeff Hardy and CM Punk. Jeff Hardy ended up leaving, but he was this guy with cool face paint, and I'm like, what is going on here? Again, I've played sports my whole life. I was a big fan of sports, and also drama and stuff like that. So it really combined what I loved. I loved at the athletic component, but also like the characters. And again, as a middle school student, it gave me an escape from life when life was really hard and I was really being dramatic during that time. So it was an escape for me. It gave me laughs and made I could relate to a lot of the characters in there, but I also appreciated the athleticism and the graps, as we say.
I'm sure anybody listening is going to hear my story multiple times. I'm going to bring it up every single time just to set the stage with the guests, so we have a perspective of where they got into wrestling and where I got into wrestling, to have those comparisons. 'Cause I think it really just adds to any conversation you have about wrestling to know each person's perspective. So for me, the first time I had ever been introduced to wrestling was I think I found the event. I think it was like around January or August. I think it was January. It was January of 2008. It was a Raw at the Frank Irwin Center in Austin, Texas. I would have been 5, just to turn 5. And I don't remember everything about the show. I just remember John Cena. That was the very specific thing I remembered, and maybe like the Miz and Undertaker there as well. And besides that, I didn't watch wrestling again for about 9 years. My introduction from there was I was a teenage boy in the 2010s, so there was the John Cena meme playing the boo boo doo boo, just that.
Yeah.
And then there was also the RKO out of nowhere meme around 2014,
Yeah.
2015, and that was my real like introduction to like actual wrestling, because I didn't know, like, even when I was 5, I didn't know anything about it. I just knew we were going to see Monday Night Raw, and I knew John Cena. And so that was like really the first time I had really known about wrestling, actually known about anything. And then WrestleMania was in Dallas in 2016, and so I knew that WrestleMania was going to be there because I was in Austin right around that time, living in Texas, and then I lived in Florida in 2017, and WrestleMania was up the road in Orlando, and that was the first time I'd actually paid attention to anything in wrestling, when I learned about Roman Reigns versus The Undertaker, where Taker retired, and then the Hardy Boys returning, and that was the first time I knew who the Hardy
Taker
Boys
didn't
were.
actually retire that year.
Yes.
He wrestled the following year and then the year after that, but that's besides the point. Yeah.
Yeah, to add context, Taker did not retire for another 3 years
Yeah.
after that. And then later that year, 2017, Shane McMahon, Kevin Owens, Hell in a Cell feud was when I actually became a wrestling fan for the first time. So that sets the stage for how different mine and Ella's journeys are in professional wrestling, separated by about 10 years,
Yeah.
give or take, from like when you started watching with Punk and Hardy. When I started watching, Jeff was injured. He had come back a few months after that. And then
Jeff was
Punk
on
was
his
still
way
not
out. It
wrestling.
was literally when I started watching it was Jeff's literal last match before he
Yeah.
returned in 2017. I ended up watching TNA, like I again, similar to how I found WWE later that year. I found
Mhm.
TNA randomly through scrolling channels, and then the week, literally days later, was when Jeff Hardy popped up. I believe it was January 4th, 2010. TNA, I got hooked on through that. But yeah, mine was just scrolling through channels
Mhm.
through that point, and then SmackDown was the brand. I would see commercials for Raw, but I didn't really know what it was until I went to my first live event that later that year, and they implemented both Raw and SmackDown rosters, and like
Mhm.
John Cena, DX was a huge first influence of mine, for the comedy
Mhm.
aspect of the escapism. And then obviously Mickey James was somebody who I could relate to on a personal front, especially as a middle school preteen girl during that time. So yeah, but yeah, a lot of it for me is the escapism, but also combined with the athleticism too.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the escapism, because it's such a important thing, I think, with everybody, especially 2020 with COVID and just where the world is right now. I think everybody has something they use for escapism. So going back to you and you using wrestling for escapism, what is that like for you? Why is wrestling that escapism? How do you use it as escapism? Why do you think it's the best thing for you?
Again, I feel like it combines because I come from such an athletic background. It's like my whole life growing up through high school was all sports. I did volleyball, basketball, I did softball for 10 years. I did dance, I did karate for a year. I did bowling. I basically did everything. And I was also a huge, MLB fan at the time, and
Mhm.
so athletics was always something that I always loved doing and watching. So seeing that combined with like the drama elements that I like in like regular fictional TV shows, and
Mhm.
also comedy, like I said, with DX. I feel like it is those two combined. It's kind of the best of both worlds in a way, because like I said, it's the entertainment, especially in WWE, it's World Wrestling Entertainment. It's a mix of wrestling and that athleticism, that entertaining aspect where these characters on screen personalities are evoking an emotion, whether it's comedy, it's sadness, the even just the absurdity of the storylines as well. That itself it's a mixture of all things. And especially for me, again, especially in the early days, like I said, I was a middle school preteen girl who was very insecure, had a lot of insecurities and still do. So for people like, D Generation X, Shawn Michaels, and Triple H version specifically, and even R-Truth at that time, looking back with the comedy spots that they did, that gave me a good laugh, when I was down or like, dealing with all the middle school drama, that because I wasn't the coolest kid. Or on the other side of it, I felt related. I resonated with Mickey James because during that specific period of time, there was an infamous storyline called Piggy James, where they essentially made fun of her body, and they what's it called, they exaggerated it obviously because of TV. But I definitely related to that, and being bullied and seeing her persevere on screen. She beat Michelle for the title, at the Royal Rumble in 2010, and she was on top. I mean, we're not going to talk about the fact she was released like 3 months later, but that storyline, looking back, I don't think it was tastefully done, but it for me, it hit so close to home, especially at a time where I was very down on myself and my own body. That really resonated with me. And then obviously, like, the athleticisms of like a John Morrison, like a Dolph Ziggler was during that time. I was not a fan of his, like, he was a heel during that time, but it was still cool to see all the stuff he could do, And
Mhm.
I could love people. I could also hate people like CM Punk and the Straight Edge Society. You're rooting for your heroes and your villains. So for me, it's just the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about the storylines and the absurdity of it, the out of this world nature of professional wrestling, where you have to just suspend reality at certain points.
Yeah.
And there are storylines that are based in reality as
Yeah.
well, but there's something for everything. I want to move more towards the in-ring style. What about the in-ring do you like the most? Because for people who don't, like, if you know wrestling, you know how different in-ring is and how much it varies. But if you don't, there's so many variations of in-ring style. You have technical wrestling, which carries into its own other thing of chain wrestling versus counter versus mat versus submission based. There's all these different things of subsets of technical wrestling. And then you have cruiser wrestling, the high flyers. There is brawlers. There's strong style. There's big men slapping meat. There's all these different styles of professional wrestling. So when you have to pick one or two specific styles that resonate with you, what are they and why?
I don't know if it's a specific style per se, but I definitely realize I'm drawn to a lot of the people who can sell really well, like a Shawn Michaels, like a Mickey James, like a Dolph Ziggler, um, even Alicia Fox, who's kind of, underrated in that element. The people who have that heart and that soul, I
Mhm,
feel like they can adapt. They're kind of all arounders. They're kind of all arounders too. I don't think I'm necessarily invested into one specific, style specifically. I feel like I do like the all arounders who they can do some high flying stuff, but they can also be like fast paced. They can be strong, even if they're smaller performers, even I
mhm,
love a Jeff Hardy, who's a high flyer. So I feel like I really enjoy the all arounders, but I do also like the high flyers as well.
mhm,
Like a Jeff Hardy, like a John Morrison, But I feel like in general, for me, it is the all around package. The kind of a combination of everything. I really love the performers who have that heart and are kind of underdogs in a scenario, that are really good at selling in ring moves, but also the emotion in the ring as well, kind of creating this whole it's the performance art of wrestling. So kind of, I guess the best answer is all arounders, but I really love and enjoy people who can sell really well,
mhm,
moves as well as the emotions that we see in the ring. But I do love the high flyers as well. Like for me, like a John Morrison, a Jeff Hardy,
mhm.
those names as well.
So, not including the high flyers part, your explanation of that makes a lot more sense why you like The Miz so much. Because I've been perplexed by this for as long as I've known you. Your love of Mike the Miz Mizanin just
Mhm.
shocks me.
I used to hate The Miz, I growing up though, again, you don't know for the first like 2 years,
Mhm.
year and
Yep.
2 years, you don't realize that there's this thing called kayfabe that they're not actually like. I legit hated CM Punk.
Mhm.
Straight Edge Society annoyed the crap out of me. I thought they were horrible people. But as you get older and you understand the business more, like, and you grow up too, like Miz's heel work is so good that for me, you can't hate it. He is so good at what he does. I've just learned to appreciate. He's great on the mic. He may not be recognized for like everything. He's not. His in-ring work isn't like it is. He's not recognized for his in-ring work, but he is the.
Ella, I'd go as far as calling it bad,
I
personally.
don't think so. For me, I'm gonna joke when I say this, but he's a lucha legend, okay? But he,
Uh-huh.
he's like the ultimate utility guy. In a way, he's similar to a Dolph Ziggler, not as selling wise, but
Mhm.
you know, anybody that you need to fill in a spot, you can trust the Miz to do it. That's why he's been trusted to, put over so many new talents and celebrities like a Bad Bunny, like that WrestleMania match. There's a reason why they chose him to do that. Why they chose him, last year to take the spots with, Snoop Dogg in the ring and George Kettle, because they can trust him to do that. And there's a reason for that, because he's an all around guy. He may not be necessarily recognized or have, all these, like high flying moves, or technical, but he's all around. He has every little aspect that you can look for, I feel like. And his character work, I just super appreciate it because he is so good on the mic. He's so good at drawing heat. It's so weird to still see. I prefer heel Miz, but I will be cheering him regardless. I think, he is the ultimate utility guy, who I think is underrated. And you can't hate, even if you don't like his in-ring work, you can't hate his promo work or his heel work, because he is so good. That man, alongside Damian Mizdow, that was a great storyline, you know. So I love him personally, and that will never change.
Yeah, I mean, he's not like, yeah, that he's not personally for me. And
Mhm.
wrestling is such a subjective art that it really does vary, and that's what's so great about it. Talking about why we love graphs, it's one of the reasons I love wrestling. There is something for everybody, but I must commend, like, he is a very good utility wrestler, and that is something that, like, I don't like there's a basic style of WWE, and everybody knows it when you see it, but it's hard to describe and put into words. But there is a basic style that you say that is a WWE style, that is a WWE wrestler. Guys like the Miz and
That's why
like a
he's
Dolph
lasted
Ziggler,
so long. That Dolph
100%,
Dolph
100%.
Ziggler lasted 19 years. The Miz is, again, this year marks 20 years. The end of
Yeah,
this year marks 20 years. There's a reason why, those two, Dolph was there for the longest time, because again, even if he wasn't in the most high profile positions, he was that good all around that they trusted him to be in. He could waver between any storyline,
yeah,
and same with the Miz. The Miz though, in his own right, has those Hollywood attachments and has a little bit more stock to his name, with everything else he's been involved with. But there's a reason why the Miz is literally 20 years into WWE at this
yeah.
point.
100%. There is a thing there that benefits people who can find that specific style, and I'm interested to see how that like, unrelated to all this. I'm interested to see if that changes as Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Paul Levesque runs WWE creative over Vince. But when you look at the last 20 years of wrestling and that style that's been ingrained in Stamford, Connecticut, Miz is he's really crafted that style very well, and he knows what he has to do. So moving on from the Miz into some other people that you like, you mentioned Mickey James, mentioned Jeff Hardy. CM Punk's a different character all in himself. Who are some other people who stand out to you? I know there's one more that we have big disagreements on. Why don't you?
Randy Orton.
No, no.
Randy Orton again is another one.
Randy's one you do love, yeah.
Yes, I do. I don't know who you're talking about, who we disagree on then. Randy Orton is one who, again, I remember you weren't around for this, but WrestleMania 26, the years leading up to that was the famous Cena Orton, rivalry.
Mhm.
And so for WrestleMania 26, they in WWE magazine in the lead up to that, they had this giant poster of Team Cena, Team Orton. Man, I was always Team Orton. I didn't like Randy for the first little bit because again, I didn't understand kayfabe, and he was with Legacy at that point, and he was just evil at that point.
Mhm.
But once I got slowly, 2010, 2011, Randy Orton's again, his heel work is really, really good, and there's a reason why also he's lasted as long as he has 24 years, pretty much at this point, 25. I think he started in 99 potentially. Randy Orton, again, who is a kind of an all-arounder as well, I mean, he doesn't really do the high-flying stuff, I should say. But he's one who's lasted as long as he has because he has, I mean, stock to his name. He's taken pretty well of himself, besides his back problems. And man, I don't know how to explain it. Randy Orton again was my number one favorite, I would say, between 2011 and like 2015, 2016. And stuff evolves, but I've always been a Randy Orton fan as well.
Mhm. So yeah, Randy Orton, The Miz. Who are some others? Like, give me like at least like give me 2 to 3 others that you would kind of put up there as well.
Like besides ones that I haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Give me a few more.
I mean, I said Dolph Ziggler too. I don't
Yeah,
know. So okay, so don't get into
Mr. Nick
Dolph Ziggler.
Nemeth.
Yeah, I do love him. Like all time or like current as well.
Let's do current. Let's go more on the current side because I think it's interesting when if you put current, it compares back to like you can compare it to Mickey, Randy, Jeff, and Miz, and sort of how that's evolved.
So one just returned from injury, Dakota. Man, there's three. I'm gonna name three if that's okay.
That's
Dakota
fine. Give me
Kai,
3.
is definitely one. Again, she is so good at selling. Man, it's the sellers really get me. It seems like
Mhm.
Dakota is so good at selling. She's also like one of the nicest people. Even if she's a heel, she still gets so many cheers and people love her because she's a great performer. And she, granted, she's had some setbacks from her injuries and stuff like that, but just seeing especially how she's evolved, from a girl from New Zealand, going throughout the world on the indies for like a decade, then finally making it to WWE, coming in as this, nice Kiwi character to then, turning on Tegan Knox at War Games. We finally got to see heel Dakota Kai. She later turned on Raquel. I feel like she's so underrated and she's great at selling. She can adapt to basically any situation that she's in, and I feel like
Mhm.
at the same time though, I feel like she's an underdog who they haven't given her a proper time to get her singles moment yet. She's come short. She's vied for a few championships, but she's been in, what's it called? The shadow of a lot of people. So I'm always rooting for her.
Mhm.
Um again, Io Sky, who's she's reached the single success. But you cannot not be entertained by Io Sky because again, she's one of those high flyers again who is willing to do anything, and she can do it. She can execute literally anything. We've seen her jump off of a cage with the trash can on her head, before she just does things that like shouldn't be possible. She's great at selling. She's very exciting as a performer, and she's getting again similar to Dakota, she's also good at selling, but she's been propelled to the top, and so I've always been thoroughly entertained by her.
Mhm.
And then another kind of a personal attachment is Jamie Hayter. She's been out of action. But Jamie kind of has a personal connection with me because the first ever sounds so stupid. First ever independent match because growing up, I knew what indie wrestling was very close minded to it, so really only watched WWE, TNA, Ring of Honor growing up. 2019, in to go against Super Showdown. Pro Wrestling Eve was doing a thing called Super Showdown, which was a collection of matches from their past shows. And the first match I remember seeing was Britt Baker versus Jamie Hayter. Ironically, a couple years later, they were working in AEW, but I just remember the crowd being so invested in her. She had a great look. She
Mhm.
could wrestle. She could be hard hitting. So really through that match, really got me invested into the indie scene and has really, I mean, kind of molded my kind of mission in wrestling media, you know, with
Mhm.
women's wrestling specifically focusing on like the indie scene and stuff like that. And to see where she was kind of be the reason why I got into indie wrestling besides Britt, and where she is now and have it come full circle with her and Britt and AEW has been really cool to see. So she's kind of a personal connection, but also her in-ring work. I don't know what performer you were talking about though that we would disagree on. I don't know. I don't know who you're talking about.
I was talking about Saraya.
Oh yes, yeah. Soraya was another one. You know what? There's a difference for me between Soraya and Paige. There's a
Yeah,
distinction.
yeah. There's a
Paige,
distinction.
Paige for me, you know,
To be clear
growing
to
up,
people who don't know wrestling, Paige and
yes,
Saraya are the same person. Paige
yes,
was her WWE name.
yeah.
Saraya is her real name that she uses in AEW.
Yes, Paige was another, you know, after Mickey left, and kind of as they after like Kelly left, she was another one of my
Mhm.
basically, you know, after all my OGs kind of left WWE, you know, besides Natalia, of course, the mid 2010s era, Saraya for me was I mean, I enjoyed her in-ring work, but also she was one who I related to kind of appearance wise because I am
Yeah.
also very pale. um, I don't know if man, I met her. She might still be paler than me, but especially, you know, as a teenager growing up as a that has a fairer complexion, that was one of the things, you know, kind of similar to Mickey James that I was insecure about. And so seeing her, you know, embrace herself, embrace her uniqueness and being a fairer skinned girl in a world full of, you know, tanned, gorgeous ladies, and not to say she is still gorgeous, but in the world of tan, um, really stood out to me. I really resonated with her in that seeing somebody who looked kind of similar to me and had a similar kind of emotion connection to that.
Mhm.
Paige was definitely huge for me, especially in the mid 2010s. And then unfortunately before she you know, came back as Soraya in 2022, you know, and she got injured unfortunately. So that was very sad. But Paige was definitely one in the mid 2010s who I like my dream match is Mickey versus Paige. Or Mickey versus Soraya, it would be now, I guess.
Yeah. So as we wind this down, Ella, I'm going to ask you one more question. Why the title? I mentioned the title a few times. Why we love Graps, and I'm going to ask you that question, but I want you to put that answer into one word. You only get one word to answer. So, why do you love Graps?
Could be a hyphenated word.
Technically, it's if it's one word, it counts.
I'm making this a hyphenated word. I don't care.
Okay.
We're doing athletic escape.
Okay. That's a good one. I like that. I think that's describes wrestling incredibly well, and it's definitely something that a lot of people love about wrestling, an athletic escape. So, Ella J, thank you so much for joining me on this episode or this version of Why We Love Graphs. I don't know if it'd be considered an episode, but yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.